Hello everyone, welcome to Lush and Salty Aquariums. My name is Stefan. Thank you for coming to my channel. Alright, I went for it. In this aquarium, I gave it perhaps the most significant, well, maybe the second most significant cleaning since I set the thing up, alright, like 3 years ago. If you look at the very last video of this aquarium, not that you would, I wonder if anyone ever does that, right? When someone references a video, if they actually go back and look at it. But be that as it may, if you were to do that, you would see a super lush and plush aquarium. And I mean, it was healthy. I didn't have any significant issues, but that isn't to say that there weren't some percolating. I mean, as much as I am a major advocate and proponent of erring on the side of too many plants, there is a line where if you cross, it will start to become problematic for your tank, especially if other factors aren't being taken into consideration, you know, filtration and the overall health of the livestock, etc. But in this aquarium, it was an aesthetic decision. Not that I didn't like the way it looked before, super lush and plush, but there comes a time when every man needs a haircut, and this aquarium reached that time. Let me just walk back 5 seconds. A lot of times, and maybe you're like this, you start, well, I'm gonna move this plant or trim this plant, and you know, one thing leads to another, and before you know it, it's a 3-hour undertaking. And honestly, folks, to do what I did in this aquarium, and you know, to do it the way I did it, right or wrong, maybe I took the long way in some cases, or retraced my steps and started over, whatever. It took me 3 fat hours. It was a labor of love. I mean, the time just went right by. Before I knew it, the lights in the fish room started going off, and that was my only indication that so much time had slipped by. So some of the things I did, and I'm not going to be so vain as to think you're going to remember what this tank looked like even last video. So I'm going to show and tell. That Bacopa in the back there, which is a more traditional place for a plant like that, I had it right up here by the diffuser in the front right hand corner, violating, you know, one of the primary rules of aquascaping. Don't make your foreground bigger than your background, loosely speaking. But I had done it for at least 1.5 years. I thought it was really cool. It was actually very cool. Sort of framed the tank, and you know, that's a beautiful plant, and it's one of the few plants that grows straight up. I mean, it is a stick, which is awesome. And the leaves, unless you've really got a problem, the leaves at the very bottom will be almost, if not just as awesome as the ones at the very tippy top. And that Bacopa had gone up, and this is a tall tank, right? It's a few extra inches taller than your typical 20 gallons, so it's 22.5 gallons, I think. And it had gone all the way to the top there and had breached the surface and was doing just fine. But I decided, you know, I'm gonna move it in the back. And part of the reason that informed that decision was the Cypress halferi, a glorious plant, had run its course. It had started to die back and was browning, and in a way it looked like it was going to seed, and in some respects I honestly think it really was. There were tufts at the top of it, and it looked like if it was in the wild, I would think it was, you know, that time of the year when grass-like plants go to seed. But the yellow and the, dying plant can't be great for any ecosystem, so that drove me to decide to move this plant back there. And while I was doing that, I realized I'm going to need more light back there, which is probably why the Cypress halferi started to suffer in the first place. Because these pothos leaves on the immersed growth was cutting the light from this twin star, because the ever encroaching red dwarf, the tiger lotus here, that was starting to encroach upon what precious little real estate allowed light in. I had lost that previous plant, and so I moved that one back there. And because I did not want the same thing to happen again to this light-loving bacopa, I cut back a few big fat pothos leaves, so right, that's easy. I cut back some of the lotus, some of the big petals there, again pretty easy. And then I went down in there and with my hands just dug down and pulled out a couple years worth of whatever the hell collects in places like that. And the dying roots and what have you from the Cypress halferi, I pulled that out, of course. There were a few other sticks and stones and things that had gathered over time in that space, and I cleared it all out. And while I was doing that, I started to trim other leaves, not just the lotus, but Anubias, big fat leaves that had pushed sort of unappealingly up and over into that space. And my first inclination was I'll just pull the ones that have a conspicuous amount of that black spot algae or other forms of algal growth, which will happen on Anubias. It's a slow grower, and when a plant's slow growing, it can't always compete with algae. There are other reasons, the light source, etc. But I started clipping those, and then I just went a little overboard and decided to clip every leaf that looked anything less than 90% awesome. And so there went an hour all across the tank, and you see I still left some. I could have pulled those out, but I didn't want to denude the space. But the more I was trimming, the more I was getting back to, in a sense, what was the original intent here. There were two pieces of really badass and beautiful hardscape, kind of an bogwood. And while I still don't see much of those, it did create this really neat island effect. It looked like a throne, like Game of Thrones. I mean, that was the reference I used when I set it up to show you how many years have passed by. And as I was trimming, I was starting to love that I was getting back to that island effect. And you can see it right here. In the saltwater part of our hobby, they have a cool word for it, which escapes me now, but it means those island pieces of like brain coral or miniature coral reef extremities that seem to stick out across the sand bed. And there's a whole aquascaping school where you can build those and create and replicate systems like that. But the island aquascape is a classic in its own right, and I was getting back to that, and I decided to make the most of it. So I cleared the front to some extent. You still see some cryptparva across the bottom there, but I added some more of the Blixa japonica, which the ones that were in there, you see it's a little bit yellow. It's not its best self. And that was also because of all the Anubias leaves and other leaves, and I'll talk about that in a second. Well, let me get right to that. You see a few strands from this Cryptocorn balanacea. There was a ton of that just draped over the surface, far and thick, and even into this area of the aquarium. And with that and the bacopa all the way up at the top, Blixa japonica, which is, I would say, an intermediate plant, you know, and to say nothing of the diffuser, which, you know, as much as CO2 helps, and it's still an object in the way of a plant's growth, the steel part, the actual tool itself. But anyway, I added to the colony of Blixa japonica down there. I'm feeling this crypt parva is going to start to bounce back because I cleared out a whole bunch of moss and some hair algae that had begun to accumulate down there. But with the added light from clearing out the anubias leaves and the lotus, etc., that's going to help all three of the, you know, both the crypt and the Blixa rebound quickly. The other thing I did when I cut a lot of the Cryptocorn balanacea, and the good thing about that hardy plant is you can, in fact, just cut the stems. And unlike a lot of plants, in particular crypts, that's going to create problems for the overall health of the plant. But once you've got it going, which this is going, once you know it's spreading and it's got these powerful, you can basically just cut it, and you see that little new growth there. In a week or two, that's going to be mid-aquarium, and you know, I'll be right back where I started before too long. But I did buy myself a lot of time to enjoy this particular island aquascape. And you can see the bucephalandra, how cool is that, on the left. And just to round it out, there's some Java fern here. And I pulled some of that, the stuff that was looking the most crummy. Java fern always is going to look a little bit crummy, parts of it. I mean, that's just sort of comes with the territory on that plant, even a healthy plant. I did miss my train of thought. Mermaid weed, forget the scientific name, but I cut and pulled, I cut stems as well as pulled entire stems out and reintegrated that plant to comprise the whole back left portion of this tank. And when it gets taller without that balanacea in the way and with a nice twin star light right on it, nothing impeding, CO2 of course, in my tender loving care, that beautiful red orange firework like you see on that one top there, they're all gonna look like that. And it won't take long, and they will fill out the space there and block all the roots from the main planter where that pothos is growing from. Of course, every time you do a trim, you're gonna get to see your fish more and more. They might freak out for a day, but then they're gonna take advantage of all the real estate you've opened up. You see the dwarf golden barbs, the SB rasboras right there, beautiful. I call them the Art Deco fish because of their patterning and color. You see the rummy nose rasbora, there's a beautiful male with the slate gray and the red nose, a couple males in there. Should be there's a female, by the way. Oh no, they look a little bit like these dwarf golden barbs, so my mistake. I'm not sure if we'll see a female. They are much more drab by comparison. There's a couple male endlers in here, the black fire. That's what's left. I got rid of all the other ones. There's some cardinal tetras in here. They're actually being slightly more reclusive since the trim, which I did 24 hours ago, but you can see one back there. There's a whole bunch of panda coreodoras, different age groups. There's a couple right there. I'm almost certain they spawned in here. There's a giant monstrous mono shrimp. I've got a group of black phantoms. You can notice how they often can look like red phantoms, but those are black phantoms. couple males sparring right there. I'm sure there's other fish and creatures in this aquarium that I'm just missing, but I wanted to show you a post haircut on what is almost the iconic Lush planted tank in my fish room. And you know, 24 hours after a thoughtful haircut, I'd say 9 out of 10 aquascapes are gonna rebound and look like really handsome, which is what your mother would say when you'd come home with a new haircut, even if she was lying to make you feel good. But in fact, it's true. Plants love being invigorated that way. It stimulates new growth, and it gets rid of what was basically a life suck on their system, you know, dying stems and leaves. It's all good. But I did it, and I wanted to show you. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. I'd really enjoy and appreciate your support. You could like and subscribe. It's been slow going on that front, but I don't really care, which is why I've never beseeched anybody to ever do those things, but I just thought of it, so I'm asking. Hey folks, as always, keep your hands in the tank, albeit carefully, and ciao for now.